Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am Rachel Paul with IAAP, and this is our second webinar in our Accessible Digital Content mini-series. Before we begin, I just have a few housekeeping items to go over. We do have closed captioning provided. You can select the closed captioning icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. I will also be sharing a stream text link in the chat as well. And we also have sign language interpreter with us today. All attendee microphones are muted to prevent any background noises or disruptions. And we will be monitoring the chat for any dialogue or technical issues. And we encourage you to post your questions in the Q&A throughout today's session. And we will get to those at the end. And the webinar will be recorded and made available in our archives afterwards. So I'm happy to introduce Emily Kund today to kick off our webinar.
Well, thank you so much. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Here we go. All right. So thank you for spending some time with me today to learn more about creating more accessible data experiences. I want to share a little bit about who I am so that you know who's on the other side of this screen. So that way we get to know each other a little bit. You can connect with me at the end of this, and I'd love to learn more about you as well. But I'll let you go through these slides, but I just want to pull out a few things about me. I'm a mom of two amazing kids, Alex and Katie. I'm an accessibility advocate in the data visualization, or as I'm trying to incorporate into my language, data experience space. I'm a founder of Pretty Strong Smart, a women's and girls empowerment initiative. And let's see, I'm a coffee lover, but really what I do in my full-time job is to help people create dashboards that will lead others to data-informed decisions. So that's my full-time job, and I love it. And I love incorporating accessibility into my work and to make those dashboards accessible or more accessible. So we have a range of attendees here today. And so some of this is going to be a little bit of level setting to make sure we're all on the same page when it comes to accessibility. So there are various definitions out there, but when it comes to accessibility, I consider it to be making the experience available to as many people as possible. And I think that that's also a really good question to ask yourself when developing charts, graphs, dashboards, or these data experiences. So when I talk about accessibility, sometimes people will say, but why do I need to do this? Especially like in the data visualization or data space. And I go back to like, what's your why? So personally, my why started with my daughter, who is neurodiverse and has dyslexia. And I remember Katie trying to read something one day, trying to read a passage for school. And she says, "Mommy, why do they have to make it more difficult? This looks the same." And really what it was a capital I and two lowercase L's. But they all looked like L's because I think it was probably Arial font. And that just made it more difficult for her. She was so frustrated. She already had problems reading and challenges reading in the first place. And now somebody used a different font that made it even harder. She was so frustrated. So I think about the Katies of the world who can't read the words, who can't make out colors. They're so frustrated, yet they're so smart. And wouldn't you do anything in your power to help somebody you care about? So that's why I started getting more passionate and talking more about accessibility. But, maybe you don't want to bring the Katie in your life into the work setting. So what's your work why? I always share this because Maybe the personal why doesn't resonate. So there's the work why. Number one, key decision makers in your audience may need that accessible data experience. Maybe they know, and maybe they're willing to raise their hand and tell you what they need, but maybe they don't know. But you should, to the extent possible, really create the most accessible experience possible so that as many people can understand it. Secondly, if you do any work for the federal government, it's required under Section 508 of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so if you're a contractor and let's say you are providing them some charts or graphs as part of your reports, or maybe that's what you're doing for them, they've contracted that out to you. Those charts and graphs in this particular case, they need to be accessible because the federal government has that requirement. And then generally, it's just the right thing to do. So here's the kind of level setting part to this. Let's talk a little bit about exclusions. I've shared recently before this talk, I was sharing about how some people still believe that accessible data visualization or accessible data experiences really just need to focus on blindness or color blindness, kind of the sight aspect. But there's really so much more to it. There is sight, which is a major exclusion. There's also sound, less of a concern usually with the data visualizations experiences. Dexterity, that's a massive exclusion for the data experience. And comprehension, equally important. But then, and this is really what changed kind of the way that I thought about accessibility in data visualizations or experiences. It was the time element, because it's not just the person who's blind or the person who's colorblind. That might be a permanent thing, but there can be situations and there can be temporary aspects to this exclusion or permanent. And so I like to use the example of me. One morning, I woke up and my finger was locked in place. And I had to take my iPad and straighten my finger out. And it was really scary. And I almost cried because I was afraid I was going to break my finger. And secondly, I do work on the computer all the time. It's my livelihood. And what happens if I can't work on the computer? If I can't build these visualizations, if I can't build the programs that people need in order to make those accessible data experiences. And so it was temporary because I was able to unlock it and work. And now I've had an injection where it hopefully won't come back. But in that case, I have some dexterity issues because I have an issue with my fingers. And that's just part of who I am. So that's not sight and that's not permanent. And so when you consider the types of exclusions along with the time elements, then you really see this broadens out to more than just this one population of people that we thought originally when people think about accessibility in data. So now that we've done some level setting, I want to get into some design considerations. Design with accessibility in mind. I think the first thing to do is know and learn about your audience. Besides creating user-centered data experience, generally this would be creating user-centered dashboards or user-centered data experiences. It's really important though, because you may not have somebody that does, as I mentioned, feel comfortable with raising their hand saying, I have this exclusion. Some people may not know that they have an exclusion. And again, using me as an example or kind of the population of women my age, back when we were growing up, ADHD wasn't really diagnosed in little girls. And so we're starting to see, anecdotally, I've seen more women of my age start getting diagnosed. And if you look at any Instagram, you may have Instagram ads about ADHD with women, so of my age. So I say that not because I'm offering some medical diagnosis, but because I might not even know that I am neurodiverse because it wasn't diagnosed when I was younger. I just know that this is how I work. And so by knowing your audience, you can pick up on some of these exclusions or just what would help them get to their end result much quicker. And the next thing is to recognize the exclusions and solve for one, extend to many. Just like with captioning, where it's a necessity for some, in other cases, captioning is great because you may be in a busy room and you really need to be able to read it versus hear it. In a data visualization or a data experience, it could be those big numbers or the high contrast. Maybe I don't have low vision, but because I need to get to those insights really quickly, that big number jumps out at me on the screen and I know exactly what I need to focus on. Be consistent with your conventions. We'll cover that in a minute. Provide choice and prioritize your content. So let's dig into each one of these. So knowing and learning about your audience, it's more than just a requirements gathering exercise. Learn how they plan to interact with that dashboard, and that will help you design it. Get feedback. That can be done together, watching their interactions with the dashboard or the chart. Asynchronously, give them the chart, the dashboard, and have them share back what works and what doesn't. And then from an automated or less intrusive, implement some tagging or tracking software to see where they click. Eye tracking is also a possibility for some. But get feedback so that way, even if you don't have all of the information up front, you can iterate on it and make it more accessible as you go. Solve for one, extend to many. I just kind of talked about this, that recognize the exclusions of your audience. I talked about you don't need to be visually impaired to benefit from this with the big numbers that are color contrasted. It does help with people knowing where to draw attention to and what's important. I just got so excited, I jumped ahead a little. Being consistent with your conventions. This is so important. And I think sometimes we don't realize the implications of some of our decisions. And this is one where consistently using titles, headers, subheaders, that means something to screen readers. And I have made this mistake before where I just used a text object and made the text bigger, bigger and bolder, making it look like a title, but it was really just text. So use that convention because it does mean something. Use consistent color usage in your dashboard or your charts. It helps with comprehension. So that way people know that light blue means central no matter what. It just helps them get to that insight faster. And then apply the conventions. Small typically means less size and less color. I've seen examples where people have used a color range where, and I'll use a really obvious kind of example, profit and loss. And so loss typically would be in red. That's what we associate loss with. There's a color association there. And then typically profit would be in green. People will sometimes, I've seen, reverse that color palette. So green would be loss and red would be profit. Now, that's a really obvious example because that on the surface doesn't really make sense. But it's a great example because it's breaking this pattern of what we know. And sometimes pattern disruption can be great, but a lot of times we have to now figure out what's going on with the color. What does this mean? Like we're spending more time processing the color legend than processing what the data is trying to tell us. And then consistently apply your layout so people know what to expect to help them focus. So if it's part of your job to create charts or dashboards, use a layout where filters are on the right or the left-hand side or maybe up top, but do that consistently so that way people know, okay, I go here to filter and I know that my bands, my big aggregate numbers or my KPIs are going to be first. And then I can get into the meat of what is trying to be conveyed. But it really helps focus on how I make the chart change, and then here are the results. Provide choice. Accessible experiences are ones where people can complete a task multiple ways. And that includes being able to use a mouse or keyboard navigation. And then provide alternative ways of presenting data. Make that data available. I use a business intelligence tool when I'm doing some of my dashboarding, and it's really important to not only show the visual, but have a data table under that's accessible, available to people, so that way the screen reader can read it, number one, and then two, if somebody needs to go in to help them understand, or maybe, so for comprehension, and they can understand what's making up some of this, this visual. Prioritize your content. Focus on the most important items first. You can think about an F or a Z pattern when it comes to designing dashboards. And there's been studies that have been done that people read in an F or a Z pattern. And so you want to put your most important thing up top or top left, and the least important thing at the bottom or bottom right. So using that to help people understand what's most important about your data. And then again, use the bands, the big aggregate numbers, to draw attention to key metrics. Now, I've done a presentation similar to this before, and what I got back from somebody in Slack was, well, this just sounds like good practice. Like, what's the difference between accessibility and best practice? And a lot of times there's a lot of overlap between the two. I think data visualization best practices can help make more accessible visualizations or data experiences. But the issue sometimes is that people get away from those best practices, which is why we need to keep talking about it and providing these recommendations for how to design your data and design your dashboards. So I very quickly want to go through a case study. This is an example of a dashboard where it's an executive overview. We have some numbers up at the top that people are perhaps supposed to key in on. There's a map, there's some information to the right, and some charts at the bottom, or area charts, monthly sales by segment and monthly sales by product category. So what I did was I took this dashboard, which I didn't create. This is available. It actually ships with the tool that I use. I took this dashboard and I considered, how accessible is this? And that's where I always recommend Chartability to do this. That's where I use Chartability. It's a set of questions that can help ensure that data visualizations in this particular case, or data experiences or interfaces are accessible. And it was developed by Frank Vasky. It's such a good resource. I have it linked in the slide deck, and you'll be able to get a copy of that as well. But I went through and looked at where this kind of went awry. Now, I'm not going to go through the entire thing, but I'll pull out some of those summary of findings. The text was too small in various areas of the dashboard. Text needs to be 12-point font or higher. And in some cases, it was 9-point font. So we needed to bump that up. Color is the only encoding for the map. And screen readers can't read color. So for anybody who needed to use a screen reader for this, they were missing a huge part of what is trying to be conveyed. There were some visualizations in the hover over, and those are inaccessible when it comes to screen readers and keyboard navigation. And instructions aren't provided on how to interact with the dashboard. So what am I supposed to click? And how do I engage with this? And I'll go back just so that you can see it again. And the other thing that I found was that the slider filters, where you can slide to do date ranges or profits, those are not accessible with keyboard navigation. The keyboard actually, when you tab, it kind of skips over it. So now you don't have a similar experience for somebody who can use a mouse versus keyboard or a screen reader. So those are just a few of the findings that I had from looking at this dashboard. And I'll say, I pulled this example, one, because it ships with the product, but two, it's not egregious. Like there's no like red and green and I mean, it's a pretty unassuming kind of dashboard that we would see. So I use this as an example because we've probably seen dashboards like this all of the time. And that's why I wanted to look at, well, how accessible is this? So let me go through. So as I think about, as I was putting this talk together, one of the things that I really thought about was, okay, so if I'm new to this space, or if I've been doing this space, like what are the steps? What do I need to do actually to create more accessible visualizations or data experiences? I think the first thing to do is to know the WCAG guidance, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Know those guidelines. That's a really great place to start. There's a some of it applies more to data experiences, charts, and dashboards than others. Secondly, know your audience. Have conversations with them. If you're in an organization or if you are interested in this, define that user persona. Know how they interact with it. It will help you create a meaningful experience for them. And then you develop your dashboard or your chart. You check it for accessibility using Chartability. And I use that because that's probably the best resource that I know of right now. So that's why I promote that one versus, and it's free, versus something else. I just don't know of another really good comprehensive test for accessibility and data visualizations. So once you've checked for accessibility, get your user feedback as well. So you've got the core principles, perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust from WCAG. And then you can see how your user experiences this as well. And then you iterate. You check for accessibility again, and then show your users what the result is, and then publish it. So this seems like very basic, but I know that some people like having this step-by-step guidance of like how to tackle this. And if you are that person, here are 9 steps in order, a 9-step approach that you can use, and you can modify it for your situation or your organization. The other thing too is that it really does go beyond a data visualization, a chart, or a dashboard. It really is about creating a culture of accessibility with where you're working or where you're at. I think the biggest thing is, one, to create psychological safety. When we recognize that we are humans and not widgets, that is really helpful. And that people with differences provide perspective. That actually should be the mindset. So when I do talks, I actually don't, I didn't tell you why I needed some accessibility in my life, but I am very open with the fact that I have a chronic illness. I have Sjogren's as well, which I'm probably going to get a drink of water here in a minute. And I have some mental health issues as well. And I feel very comfortable talking about that because I feel safe talking about it and having Red Hat, my employer, know about these issues, because they've created this culture that they're just differences, their perspective, and that's okay. We're human. In addition, make accessibility part of the MVP, the minimum viable product. When you do that, you don't have to backtrack later and do rework, because if you're like me and some of my coworkers, we are all busy. So we want to get it done right the first time. And so by incorporating that in, it might take a little bit longer. As you start doing this more and more, it'll just become natural, but make it part of the standard and the standard for what goes out. And then you can build on that versus having to then backtrack, remember what you were doing, or switching on and off, which we know is not productive. And thirdly, include accessibility in your style guides. So I've had this conversation with some folks in the data visualization space, and we talk about how can you affect change at a corporate level, especially when you have a corporation that has thousands or tens of thousands of employees. How's the best way to go about that? And I think part of it is incorporating it into your style guide. Number one, that's part of the culture. This is the expectation. Two, it's scalable. You don't have to reach out to every individual person to let them know about accessibility, because it's baked into that style guide. So I think you start with the style guide, having accessibility in there, and then you can do some webinars, lunch and learns about some additional points within the style guide of creating accessible data experiences. So here are some practical tips. For sight, ensure that your colors are distinguishable and have a high contrast. Use a contrast checker. I have a slide of resources that you'll be able to pick out one that is right for you. Select a readable font. It's become a joke within my friends that I'm always promoting Verdana as a good choice because Arial made it hard for my daughter to read, but Verdana is a good choice. It's a good readable font. Use 12-point font for the body of text. For the axes, we have a tendency sometimes to minimize that text to make it smaller, but it needs to be readable. So 12-point. Use space or white space. Use a 1-pixel border between data elements. That's where that area chart from before might cause a little bit of an issue if there's not enough separation between those two. A lot of times, even with bar charts where we may stack different data items in one bar, use that 1-pixel white border around each section to differentiate it. And use double encoding, such as using arrows and color. This is one that I will fully admit, my mind was a little blown when I really thought about this. Because when I was growing up, but when I was learning about data visualization best practices, it was, in your title, use the word and color encode that word to make it like a legend, or don't use double encoding. And now here I am saying, well, wait, use double encoding. And please do not rely solely on color encoding the word in your text and make that your legend, because again, screen readers can't read color. And so I really had to think back, and I reflected on that a lot. And I started telling my data visualization community that I've been involved with since 2013, hey, double encoding is okay. And hey, by the way, even though it's clean and simple, it's not accessible. And we need to use those color legends. So I started talking about these best practices that I learned when I was learning about data visualization and saying, hold up, don't use those. Don't use those best practices. Use the double encoding, use the color legend. That I think was one of the biggest ahas, because it took something that had just been like, that had been kind of like law for me and turned it on its side. When it comes to dexterity, make your visualization accessible with a keyboard and switch if needed. Again, this is where knowing your audience really will come into play. And reduce the amount of clicks needed to get to the insights. I think generally this is a good practice anyway, but the less clicking I have to do, the less motion I have with my hand, which I might have some pain associated with it. I have fibromyalgia, and sometimes it's like pins in my fingers. And so I appreciate when people don't have to make me click all over the place. So reducing the click to get to insights, that is just a good practice anyway. When it comes to comprehension, if it works for the data, use the highlight color instead of a full color palette. This is where you'll typically see like a gray and a blue, and the blue is to highlight. One thing that I've noticed recently is that people are using a modern color, dashboard design approach, where they're very light grays and light blues. Again, that's, side note, that's where color contrast comes into play, but it's a really great example of using the highlight color to differentiate, to help people see the insight or understand the insight. Focus on the most important metrics and create space. Don't have a dense dashboard. I typically have seen this in some of the work that I do, where people they want to put as much on there to answer every question or any question that may come up. They have grid lines for a lot of their charts when the grid lines may not be necessary. I think generally speaking, grid lines aren't necessary unless you truly do need to anchor it to an axis. So look at, I call it Coco Chanelling a dashboard or Coco Chanelling a chart. And really what that means is take a look at it. And then what's something that you can take off? Is it grid lines? Is it some nice to have data that's on there? And after you've gone through that and there's nothing to take off, then you're good to go. And this gets to the focus on one story, one question. Don't try to tell multiple stories with one dashboard, and keep it simple and consistent. I've experienced this every time I talk about this comprehension. I am automatically transported back to a class on interest rate risk management when I was a bank examiner. And there was this chart that was there, and it was before I was in the data visualization space. And we were told to read this chart, and I had no clue. I didn't know how to read it. I didn't know what it was saying. And I felt so dumb. I'm like, what am I doing here? I don't belong here. I can't even read this chart. Now, the fact is that I'm not dumb. I may not be as smart as other people, but I'm not dumb. And so automatically, if I remember this from, and that was probably like 2007, like somewhere in that neighborhood, over 10 years ago, that really that was imprinted on me, because I never want to feel that way, and I never want my audience to feel that way. And so your audience isn't dumb, and not that you're intentional, and they didn't intentionally do that, but they also didn't help me by providing some leading language or really telling me how to read the chart. And so you can then help your audience by providing that leading language. Here's how to read it. Click here, start here. That helps people understand and then comprehend the message the data is trying to convey. Okay, so I'm about done. Here are some resources that I think are just really helpful in understanding how to create accessible data experiences. I've talked about Chartability. Frank actually just redid Chartability, that website. When I'm done here, I'll click over to that website really quick and just show you kind of a little bit about what's on there. webaim.org is a fantastic resource. Again, all of this through the lens of how do I create a more accessible chart or dashboard. Using the WebAIM color contrast checker, that was my go-to for the longest time. I did a project with Team USA on creating an accessible dashboard, and I started using the TPGI color contrast checker, which you can actually install on your computer. So that's really helpful now, and that's what I use primarily. The DataViz Ally resource shortlist is a great list of resources for creating accessible visualizations. There's the W3 accessibility link there. I also have included the Domino's website accessibility lawsuit article, because sometimes I have people in the audience that are like, I'm still not convinced. And I think that website and that article provides a good perspective on it, as well as the Section 508 website. And then a couple of articles. One is Inclusive Design and Accessibility and 10 Ways to Improve Your Data Visualizations. So that's it for me and what I have to share today. You can connect with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. If you have questions, I see a couple of them in the Q&A, please let me know. You can ask them now or later. I'm always happy to connect. And I do say, I don't know everything about this, but I do know something, and I try to share what I know because that'll either spark interest, answer questions, or help you along your accessibility journey. So thank you so much. And before I get to questions, let me just real quickly go to the Chartability workbook. So this is a subpage, it is on GitHub. And really, Frank covers the method, failures, some of the critical heuristics, how you use it. And this is the new section now, which is really great. I'm going to have to read up on it. But he also has and let me just actually bring up the main page. So he has an entire site dedicated to Chartability. You can also get a downloadable Word version of Chartability where you can go through, and he has the critical elements that you need to check and then some additional ones. So that, and there's a ton of other resources on here as well. So now that I've shared that, and I'll also actually, let me just put it in so that you have access to it right now. I will put it in the chat. All right, let me pull that up. Okay, let's see. I'll go to the Q&A first. How do you tackle conventional color associations, red and green, with color blindness needs? Oh, okay, I love this question. Thank you so much, Patrick. I may have been a little too excited about that. I fully believe in using color association. So what I tend to do is, because the key is using high contrast. So I don't want to lose that color association. So I'll use a light red, light enough that it still has enough contrast with the background, and a dark green, or a light green and a dark red. That's the one I tend to prefer more. You have to, I mean, it has to work for your data. But I think using that, using those two colors, the light red, the dark green, or the dark red, the light green, works out really well. There are also, and actually, this is a good prompt for me to look for this as a resource. I know we internally have a colorblind friendly red, yellow, green palette. So there are red, yellow, green palettes out there that have enough differentiation that are good to use. But that's generally my stance on it, because I don't want to lose that color association. Like, that's really powerful. Okay, so thank you so much for that question. Oh, right. Okay, so what about font type? Yes. Okay, so, and usually I didn't do it in this talk, but I usually use an image. It might be on WebAIM, where it shows the difference between different fonts or typefaces. So it shows you Times New Roman, Arial, Verdana, and maybe one other one I forgot. And what you notice, and I actually have some information about fonts as well, or typefaces, is you want some spacing so that it's not condensed, so that people can read the letters. They can distinguish the letters in the words and sentence. So that's part of it. And the different weights of like the bowls of the actual letters in the typeface, that also helps. And then I also think about, there's also this idea of imposter letters, and that you may have missed the beginning where I shared a story about my daughter who could not, like, she has dyslexia, so reading has been hard for her anyway. And then she was trying to read this sentence and it looked like 3 L's together, because, and I think that it was an Arial font, because the capital I didn't have the little, oh shoot, I've lost what the part of this is, but it's not a serif font. So it looked like an L. It was just the stick of an I, not like the bottom and top parts. And then a lowercase L looks really similar. And she's like, why do they have 3 L's there? I don't understand it. And so that's where I like to recommend Verdana. I think it's a really nice typeface to use. But you want to look out for those things. How much spacing is there? Are there different weights so that D's, and it's called mirroring, but D's and B's don't look the same if you were just flip them. And that's where the weight of the bowl, I think, comes into play. And then look for those imposter letters. If you look for, those are like the big 3 things that I think about when I think about typefaces. So hopefully that answered your question. Okay, and I'm just trying to now look through the chat just to see if there was anything in there. Yes, this talk will be shared with the audience. Yes, and I'm happy to connect later to talk about this more. It's still, I think, an emerging area in data visualization, data experiences. So I think the more we talk about it, the more we can influence, and making, sometimes they're just small changes being made. And when we talk about it more, we can influence change even at a product level. So for example, the tool I use is Tableau. That's what I use the most. And we talk about, for the longest time, when you would drag a sheet, like a chart, onto the dashboard, the screen reader would read it in the order in which you dragged it over to the dashboard. Now, when you're building out this dashboard, you don't think about that because you're looking at it in how it's meant to be read. But from a screen reader perspective, and I have an example from Chartability where, actually I can pull it up real quick, where Frank did a full audit of this visualization that I did. It was kind of like an infographic on disinformation. And I can share my screen to show you what it was like. And now what has happened. So if you see here, let me see if I can just put it into full screen and maybe zoom in a little more. So you can see that it started at the top, it went to the middle, it went to the circle plot, back down to this other circle plot, then down to the pie chart. Well, that was not a good experience. This audit was really what made me go, oh my gosh, we do not all have the same experiences. And like, that's duh for a lot of people. But I just had no idea. And that's what made me think about how do I structure it? And we talked about it, and Tableau now has like this intuitive reading so that it reads in the order in which it's meant to be read. So that was a really big improvement for screen readers and keyboard navigation. So I wanted to share that just because it was such a big moment, and you can see how if you don't use a screen reader or keyboard nav, somebody else's experience. Oh, and I see Celine included some dyslexic and low vision friendly fonts to use. Oh, that is great. Thank you so much for that. I need to make sure I get this chat. Okay. Oh, and then there's another, oh, this chat is great. Thank you so much, you all. This is fantastic because I love how you all are contributing to it. Okay, I'll do, oh, there's another Q&A here, I think. Are there any truly accessible data tools to use on a website, etc.? I think the major issue is usually going through the data using a keyboard, screen reader, etc. Even if the screen reader reads text, there might not be enough context. Thanks. Oh, thank you. So this is a great question. I generally will say there is no 100% completely accessible data experience unless you are the audience or you know the audience really, 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 really well, and it doesn't change. So I think you're right that it is mainly like the things I think about are keyboard, screen reader, that for context, that's where you can use some annotation. So if I were to have a chart, like a scatter plot, now scatter plots are not generally the most accessible chart type because they overlap, and that's not friendly. That's not very accessible. But let's pretend for a minute we had this scatter plot where we could see the circles in the plot. We can put some annotation in one of the corners to say, this outlier is as a result of X. So you can use annotation to help with that. So that will help with the, that can help with comprehension. And then because you're using, generally speaking, because you're using text, a screen reader can read that. So that would be my example. I think you get it as accessible as you can. And then keep learning, you'll get and the reason why I touched on feedback is because some people they're not proactive in providing feedback. So I think sometimes it's incumbent upon us as data visualization developers, or just the people who are doing this as part of their jobs, to go out and ask for that feedback. So that way we can see what really, like, how really can we help? Is there an issue with comprehension? Is there an issue, like, is it contextualized enough? I also love putting, when I have like a title for a chart, I may then also use a subtitle to provide the key insight or provide some of that context. And those are different ways that you can do that. I tend to be in this camp of you just try your best and you learn and you improve as you go forward. That's generally how I approach it. Thank you so much for the question. Okay. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions. I'll do like another call out for any questions. In the meantime, let me just put up my contact screen again. And I will say thank you so much for really being active and engaged participants, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to listen to what information I have to share. I really appreciate it. And I love to connect, so feel free to connect with me after this webinar. And otherwise, I can give some time back, but I'll let Rachel, if Rachel says otherwise, I can give you some time back.
Yes, thank you so much, Emily. And I know there were some questions in the Just want to switch my screen there. Some questions in the chat. So the webinar was recorded and we'll have available in the archives. So usually within 24 hours or so. This should be by the end of day tomorrow. And we will send out a post-webinar email with that access link, but you could, since you'll be able to find it though at the IAAP YouTube channel, but we'll send out the recording link and a copy of Emily's presentation. And I will also pull all the resources that were shared in the chat, and we'll include that in that email as well. And I wanted to thank Beth for providing our ASL today and Abby for our captions. And we have 2 more webinars coming up in this series. So when you registered, you got access to all 4. So there's a break next week, but then we pick back up on June 16th with audio description as an aesthetic innovation. And then June 23rd wraps up the series with accessibility of social media. And then on June 28th, we have a free subject matter expert webinar that stops screaming into the void and getting accessibility ideas heard by those above you. So that is free registration, open to all. So we hope to continue to see you up at future webinars. And thanks again, Emily, Beth, and Abby. And we'll be sending the follow-up information out shortly.
Thank you. Bye.